This border closure stuff is really getting out of hand. If the National Cabinet is good for anything, it must find a way to restore some order, restore some common sense to our borders when they meet tomorrow. Restore a sense of national unity. So far, the National Cabinet is not bringing this nation together. It's seeing us devolve back into 6 different colonies, 6 separate countries, patrolling their borders with vigilance, not letting much across except federal government funds. This is not how federation is supposed to work. This is not all Australians being in this thing together. We've had a young mother, Chantel Northfield, we've shown you this a couple of times, and the father, Glenn, kept in New South Wales while their newborn baby, Harvey, was in Brisbane for life-saving treatment. What sort of a country treats people like this? What sort of a state treats people like this? Especially when you consider how rare the coronavirus is in New South Wales, how mild it is as a threat to most people, and how we have to learn to deal with it. Despite these traumas and this heartache, listen to what we got from the Queensland Premier.
People living in New South Wales, they have New South Wales hospitals. In Queensland, we have Queensland hospitals for our people.
That is just shameful, absolutely disgraceful. That is not how this country works, Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. Not at all. Now, we've been focusing intently on over the past couple of days on similar issues at an even harder interstate border, the South Australian Victorian border. We'll be getting more on that in just a moment, but you won't believe how bad this is getting. As of tomorrow, South Australians in Victoria can't go home. Anyone in Victoria is treated as the unclean or the undead or something, barred from South Australia. Victorian students, we spoke to Abby yesterday, the midwifery student. Victorian students can't go back to South Australia to complete their studies, even if they're prepared to do 2 weeks quarantine. Yet they stand back and watch as South Australia looks to bring in overseas students again. South Australia is treating Victorians like mugs, and it's impacting on South Australians as well, as we'll show you in just a moment. I spoke with a family today whose farm straddles the border. Their house is on the Victorian side of the border and they have land on the South Australian side. Their children cross the border every day for school and for crucial medical treatment. They have a 6-year-old with a chronic condition. They were told they could not have an exemption. They live their lives for all intents and purposes as South Australians, but they are pushed away. Despite these health imperatives, despite most of their farm actually being on the South Australian side of the border. So they decided they'd move into a cottage on the South Australian side. Not ideal, but a solution, they thought. And they were told by the South Australian Police that this too would be against the law. Now, the latest is, and the reason they don't want to come on air and make a fuss about this, is that it looks like there's been a change of heart. It's going to be okay. They will be allowed to move on their own property across to the South Australian side of their farm and stay in this cottage that happens to be there. What a privilege. Australia in 2020. You can live on your own farm across the state border. But why force the family to do this? Why not let them stay at home in greater comfort, in greater safety? Why would South Australia do this to Victorians? Aren't we all Australians? We've asked to speak again with the South Australian Premier, Stephen Marshall. No luck so far. Let's go now to Apsley in Victoria, close to the South Australian border, and catch up with Tanya Turner, who's a principal of the Apsley School. Thanks for joining us, Tanya. I wonder if you can tell us how your school is being affected by this new, tougher border that comes into play at midnight tonight.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're a small rural school right on the border. We're 8 kilometres from South Australia. We currently have 26 enrolments, with 9 of those actually coming from South Australia, Apsley being their closest school. So today was their last day. We've got 9 students that will be learning from home, but also the impact there is out of my 7 staff, 5 of my staff members live in South Australia as well. So tomorrow it'll be me as well as my office lady manning the fort for those students that need to be here, of essential workers, students that are vulnerable and students with disabilities. So the impact is detrimental to our school, I guess you could say.
Detrimental.
You know,
You're losing a third. You're losing a third of your students because they can't cross the South Australian border. You're losing 5 of your 7 teachers. This is madness.
Yes.
Why can't they all get exemptions?
At the moment, education isn't seen as an essential service for the teachers, and if the children cross the border, the regulations are that they have to self-isolate. So also in Victoria at the moment, they are doing remote learning, but these students are of essential workers. They've got 2 parents that are actually working or are deemed vulnerable. So,
but up until now, Tanya, this has been a special border zone and people have been getting tests every week and that's worked all right. And you haven't had outbreaks in your area. Tell us how many coronavirus infections are in your region at the moment.
We have none in our immediate region at all. Like you say, all our community cross-border members are being tested every 7 days. Everyone, I mean, we don't want the coronavirus here in our community, just like, you know, they don't want it in South Australia. So everyone is being so good and abiding by the rules and actually, you know, being tested, and it's just crazy. All my staff have been tested every 7 days up till now, and, you know, it's just essential that we get these kids to school for one. I get my staff back as well. And, you know, our cross-community members can actually go about life as normal.
No, it's just a terrible situation. Communities are being torn apart here unnecessarily. Now, I know this part of the country well. I know even though you've got Victoria and South Australia, rival states in some ways, a Labor government, a Liberal government, people in that area just see themselves as part of one community. There's more rivalry over football teams than the 2 states. Tell us about how this is driving people apart and splitting communities.
Yeah, I think the main thing is actually the welfare of these people and these businesses. We've got businesses that are right on the border. We've got a veterinary clinic that services Western Victoria as well as South East. We've got people who live in Apsley who run businesses in Narracourt, and, you know, they're getting rejected with their exemptions. And, you know, even today, as the kids left, they said to me, Mrs. Turner, how long is this going to go on for? And we just, you know, we can't give the kids the answers. We don't know the duration of this.
It's terrible. Just Tanya, sorry to interrupt you. And then finally, though, if you could speak directly to the South Australian Premier, Stephen Marshall, now, what would you say to him? What would you ask of him?
I would ask him to think about the kids, think about their education, think about their welfare, and also, you know, the elderly community here in Apsley, they're all very worried. They don't know where they're going to go for their medical appointments, specialist appointments, and everyday supplies and things like that. We've got farmers that are in the same boat, and we need some answers. We need to know how long this is going to go on for. We're not saying that, you know, we want the borders closed completely. We're saying we're happy to comply with the rules that we've had, the 40k radius, you know, the COVID testing, but we want some answers. We need to know how long this is actually going to go on for, and how long is it going to affect our families. But
Tanya, people don't abuse this. I mean, if they're better doctor, if they're closer to Hamilton or Horsham or Warrnambool, that's where they'll go. The people who are using the doctors or doing the jobs and education in Narracourt or Mount Gambier are people who always do that. That's the way the communities operate.
Yes, exactly. Look, it's just a line in the sand as far as we're concerned. We do everything over there. Every Apsley and district do everything over in South Australia, and it's tearing people apart. It's really, you know, people are starting to feel sick, and it's just horrible.
Thanks for joining us, Tanya. Let's hope we get some resolutions here. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Tanya Turner there, who's the principal of the Apsley School there in Western Victoria. You heard it. 5 of their 7 teachers are on the South Australian side of the border, can't turn up there anymore. Outrageous.